Okay, so welcome here to Dawn's Dirt. Welcome to my podcast. This is where we talk about anything from gardening to farming to just plain old, politics and religion and potentially dirt. So super excited for today's episode. I've got Courtney Williams here. Courtney is from Williams Cattle Company. Courtney is a regenerative farmer, beef farmer, and you specialize in grass-fed beef. And Courtney, I've known you for many years. We've worked together in the past in my store location that I owned. And yeah, you're a young family, young couple, raising cattle. And so welcome here. So could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So, like you said, I am one half of the partnership of Williams Cattle. So my husband grew up on the farm that we are now raising our kids on. We raise grass-fed and finished beef here. We both work off farm. So that's a challenge, I guess, that we would add into our busy lives. I grew up on a cattle farm in Saskatchewan. I watched my parents walk through the very difficult challenges of mad cow or BSE. And at that point, I decided I didn't want anything to do with farming. I wasn't going to marry a farmer. I wasn't going to farm. And fast forward a few years, I moved to the big city, and that's where I met Eric and fell in love with this cute boy with a gap in his teeth who had a passion for cattle farming. Here we are.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that. Oh, now you both work off farm. That's insane. So for our viewers that don't know much about farming, here's the thing. So you both farming is a full-time job in itself. 365 days a year. If it's -40, those cows need to get fed. If it's Christmas Day, those cows need to get fed. So you're working nonstop, and then you both work full-time on top of that just to support your farming habit. That if people don't understand what a farmer is, that's what a farmer is. You are doing whatever you possibly can to make that farm work. And so, yeah, tell me about that. Because if you're working full time and you've got 4 children, and they're fairly young, how does that work with your family? What's your work-life balance look like?
No such thing. There's no balance here. Yeah. So a few years ago, Eric was working off farm and farming full time while I stayed home with our children. And then that's kind of how the beef business started. It was really a blessing in disguise where people approached us and we were like, hey, yeah, let's do it. And it was something that nobody is just a mom, but I felt like just a mom and I wanted something for myself. And the beef business really did that for us. But I also still wanted a career. And again, the beef business allowed me to have both. And so when our kids were close to all being in school, I was like, okay, I think it's time for me to go back to work. And so I was able to get a job, and Eric was home. Well, he was farming full time for a little while as we were searching for something that fit because obviously we needed the flexibility, and he was offered a part-time position at a school doing maintenance. And so that's been a huge blessing. But yeah, just needing the financial part of it, where we've all seen the impacts of inflation. And so we've seen that as well, of course. And so farming, we just needed an additional income on top of mine, which we thought we could get away with one because we had done it for so long. And then we couldn't. So yeah, we're both working off farm. And for my role is really, I don't know how to say it. I guess I'm farther off of the farm than I would like, because I do spend so much time at work. And then when I am home, I'm with the kids most often. The beef business then fits into all the crevices of that, where his role is a little bit more flexible. He gets the kids off the bus, and then he's usually farming right until supper time. Sometimes it's the kids to bed and back out farming. So,
and that's important for people to know. Is I just heard you say he does what he needs to do. So he helps you with the kids, and you're working together as a team. And then he goes back outside after supper to keep farming. And I can remember growing up in the greenhouse industry, and my dad would go outside after supper and work. Yes, he maybe had a couple hours in the afternoon where he was inside, but he worked. And as a farmer, you have to just dig down and work. The work never stops, and you just have to keep going. So okay, so can you tell me a little bit about how you farm? So you're a beef farmer, and what makes a regenerative grass-fed beef farming operation different than a beef farm?
Yeah. So with our farm, like I said, it was a little bit of an accident that we got into selling grass-finished beef. But as Eric's grandpa owned this land, and then his dad, and now we have bought it at the home quarter from his parents. And as we were growing hay and raising our cattle, there was a little bit of realization that the land was not producing the way that it had 30 years ago. And the hay that we were raising for our cattle wasn't as high quality. There was just a lot of things that were like, how come we could do this 30 years ago and we can't do it now? And it really came down to soil health. Our soil had been wrecked, really. It had been overused, overgrazed. And so that we started to, with Eric's dad, learn more about regenerative agriculture, how to heal our soil, really. And at that time is when people started to ask us, would you sell us a side of grass finish, specifically beef? And so we were like, why not? But in saying that, how is it different with that? So we try to use as little equipment as possible. Obviously, we still have to use a tractor to feed our cattle. We have to use equipment to cut hay and bale and all of that. But when we're with the cows, we are handling them as much as we can. We want to get them used to us being out there. And often when we're moving electric fences, they're coming to us because they know they're going to get more food, which is always fun. So when it comes to the regenerative agriculture side of it, we're not using commercial fertilizers. The fertilizer we use is our cattle. They're walking across the grass. Their manure is what is the fertilizing our. We don't use sprays. So no, we are not considered certified organic. We probably will never, because our neighbors do spray their fields. And we have good relationships with our neighbors, and we're not going to ask them to do their operations differently, but we don't use that on our hay that we're feeding our cattle. And then, it's so with our moving our cows across the coulees and the pastures is really what sets it apart. I think we keep our cows on a piece of grass for a short amount of time, a lot of them on there at a time, that we're making sure they're not overgrazing, and then we move them. So we use paddocks with electric fences across the field and then move them every few days. And this helps to prevent overgrazing. It helps so that they're getting fresh, nutrient-dense grass. And then they are also trampling down the grass, which causes the knocked down grass to provide armor for the soil so that there's not so much sun burning up all the nutrients in the soil. And then they fertilize it. So that's our biggest. We're using our assets of the cattle to provide the nutrients for our soil is really what we're doing.
Okay. And so on a traditional or more traditional like beef farm 30 years ago, you would have a big open pasture and the cows would go out and graze everything and they would just kind of crisscross and go where they want. Whereas you move them around and let the grass regrow behind them. Is that what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, and that's really worked out for your farm.
Yeah. So I think we've seen the improvements with it with the last 3 years being drought years. We haven't had to buy in a lot of hay. There has been times where we've bought in a little bit, but there have been times in the past before we were doing this where that's all it was. As soon as there was a drought, all profits went to buying in hay. And of course, when there's a drought, everybody's buying in hay, so the prices are really high. And so we've seen that. And then we've also seen if you go out into our coulee that's just north of our house here, we our neighbors have some land in the coulee as well. And the fence line, you can see the difference in the grass, the density, the color, the growth on it is different. And you can see that what we're doing is making a difference.
Wow, that's impressive, actually. I would love to come to your farm and see that, actually, the difference between the two fence lines. So I'm curious, maybe your neighbor will look across the fence and go, man, the grass is greener. That's actually good to me. Like, the grass is greener on the other side of the fence on the regenerative farm. But would you scowl or throw your nose or point fingers at a farmer that's doing it different than you?
No, of course not. I grew up on a commercial, typical cattle farm, right? And it worked well. And of course, there's always challenges in any part of agriculture. And I think that's where we need to be supporting each other and helping each other. And we have been so supported by other farmers and having conversations where we can say like, hey, this is what we're doing and it's working really well. We've tried this and it's not working well. What are you doing? And I think too that there are enough consumers out there that want a grain-fed animal, or they're not worried about having a spray on the hay that they're from that the cattle that they're eating. And so I think that one, there's enough supply for everyone and there's enough demand for everyone. So we know that people want grass-finished beef. We were able to tap into that market. We have a lot of European customers because they're used to grass-finished beef. We have a lot of people that are recovering from, they're fighting cancer and their doctors have recommended grass-finished beef. We have things like that where it's a very niche market where we recognize that not everybody needs that or can afford that. And so if they're wanting to find a grain-finished cattle farmer, beef farmer, we'll get them. We'll connect them to that, right? So we can all support each other.
I love that. And I think that's part of the reason when I was thinking about the questions I wanted to talk to you about today and the conversation I wanted to have with you today, I wanted to really touch on the fact that all farming is important. All agriculture is important. Without farmers, we don't have food. Honestly, thank you, Eric and Courtney, for being farmers because it's important. Without you guys, we don't eat. And without every farmer, even the neighbors on the other side of the fence, without their farm, we don't eat as a society. And so it's all important. So can we talk about what grass, like there's so many buzzwords like regenerative and grass-fed and grass-finished and, grain-finished and grain-fed and organic. And there's a whole soup mix of different buzzwords that we hear in agriculture. So what is the difference between grass-fed and finished and grain-fed and finished? Can you clarify that for us?
Yeah. And this is where connecting with your farmer is so important because what we're doing on our farm might look really similar to what somebody else is doing on their farm, but they wouldn't classify themselves as what we're doing. They might say they're doing it one way, or you might assume they're doing it one way because they do have grass finished on their label. But once you start talking to them, they might not line up with what your values are. And so that's where I think it's really important to connect with our consumers and say, like, be really honest. This is how we raise our cattle. If you don't like that, we'll connect you with a farmer that is doing it the way you like, right? So with that, all cattle are grass-fed at some point in their life. They're born, they nurse from their moms, and then they're usually put out onto pasture with some green grass in this beautiful country that we have that they're fattening up on a pasture. And it's the finishing process that separates the grain-fed from the grass-fed, I guess. And so when you finish an animal, that just basically means you're preparing them for harvest. You're preparing them to be butchered. So you're preparing what meat is going to come off of them at that point. And so at that point, you want to put as much meat on them as you possibly can because you don't want to waste an animal. And so grain-finished farmers are feeding grain to do that. Grain allows an animal to put weight on really fast. It's more of a treat, I think, for a cow. They enjoy it a lot. And it's like eating pizza or cake, right? If that's all you eat, you're obviously going to put weight on. Where grass, it provides more nutrients. The process is a little bit longer to have them add on the weight. This is where we would utilize our fencing system. So they're doing a little less walking and they're not losing that fat on them. But also then the nutrients that is going into the beef is coming from the nutrients that are in the grass. And again, somebody can finish on grass, but that doesn't necessarily mean that animal is getting nutrients, because if the grass doesn't have nutrients in it, then they're not taking up the nutrients. And I think you, Dawn, having that your experience with your greenhouse, we know that you can buy a tomato at the grocery store and it might taste good. It might be okay, but it's usually not as red. It's usually not. And the way that you're raising the tomato has an impact on the density of the nutrients in it. And that's what we're trying to do with our soil. Is the nutrients in our soil is being taken up into the grass that's growing in it. And then full circle, the cattle eat it. And then that nutrients is being taken up by the cows and then going into the beef. So I'm hoping that differentiates our grass finished beef from somebody that's just, our cattle were finished on grass. Because anybody can finish on grass, but then it's the quality of the grass that it's finished.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. So nutrients are so important. I always say to clients that I have nutrients are important. Like I always ask the question, did you eat today? Yes, I ate today. Did you eat today? Yes, I ate today. And we need nutrients to grow. Cows need nutrients to grow. Grass needs nutrients to grow. So we all in life, in creation, need nutrients to grow. And so where we get those nutrients from is different farm to farm. And I love that. I love how you brought it back to know your farmer, because that's one thing I always said being at farmers markets is know your farmer. Know who grew it. Where did it come from? When was it picked? How was it grown? Because not everything that glitters is gold. I was competing at farmers markets against cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers that were grown, and they were bought and sold from the biggest warehouse in the province for cheaper than what I could grow and sell my produce for. And it was sold as farm direct produce, which was liar, liar, pants on fire. And it wasn't just one specific vendor. It was lots of vendors. I love the piece about know your farmer. Shake Courtney's hand, talk to Eric, find out what you did. And I love that you are running your farm with such transparency and openness that you would say to a customer, if I'm not what you're looking for, I will help you find the farmer that is doing what you're looking for. And that's the community piece that I love so much with farming and with agriculture and with Farm Direct is what you're getting. Just back to grass-fed versus grain-fed and finished, because we're talking grain finished and grass finished. So the finishing word is because they're both fed grass to start with. They're finished differently. How long is that process? So what's the difference in the length of time? Because you said one is eating cake and one is eating, I don't know, good quality like vegetables and beef. So if you're putting it towards people food. So could you explain the difference in time frame on how that looks for butchering time?
Yeah, I think because we are feeding grass through the whole process, it's a little bit of hard to nail down a full timeline. I'd say we'd even start to look at 3 months ahead. Like we know our quarters and halves are every October. So butcher date is going to be October. We're preparing beginning of summer, which we like to do those fall dates because that's when they're coming off the best quality hay and grass. Sorry, not hay in the winter, but I'm backtracking. Best quality grass in the summer. And so when they're coming into butcher in the fall. So I'd say the whole summer is preparing for butcher. And as for on the grain side, I couldn't even say how long people are finishing on the grain side. I know I'm thinking 3 weeks. My dad works at a feedlot. I should probably know this, but I don't know. Oh, I can't compare.
So but from my understanding, and I only have a limited knowledge as well. So it takes a grass or grain finished beef take, I think it's 18 months, whereas yours is 2 years. Is that kind of the age of the animal is maybe where I was kind of going with that question.
Okay.
What's the age of the animal?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say, ours are definitely closer to the 2-year mark, sometimes even 3 years, depending on what's gone on with that animal. But yes, with the grain finished, we're even finding sometimes an older animal can be even better, where grain finished is younger.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything you want to talk about? Here's a good question. What misconceptions do people have about grass-fed beef or regenerative farming, and how do you address them? So what misconceptions do you have when you're talking to the community and when you're talking to customers? What do they think versus what's actually happening?
So with that, I think most often when I'm standing at a farmer's market, people read grass finished beef and I often get the answer, oh, I don't like grass finished beef. And there is a misconception that grass finished beef can taste very gamey. And again, it all goes back to how it's fed. So if it's just getting eating as much hay as it possibly can and it's not getting a variety of different nutrients and different plants, then it probably will taste a bit gamey. Some people like that, especially I find hunters, they're all for grass-finished beef, right? Whereas we've often been told that our beef does not have that gamey taste, and that's definitely our goal. We've brought in some Galloway bulls because we've done the research on Galloway is a good cattle breed to finish on grass. And so that helps with the flavor, I guess. And then it's also important to remember that like a lot of times we're in Alberta, people grew up eating grain finished beef. Anybody thinks they can cook a roast, but you can when it has a lot of fat in it. But grass finished beef is very lean. And so I often try to remind my customers that you want to add back in some of the fat that didn't naturally come in it. So I'd recommend butter, high quality ghee. I really like to cook with ghee, especially our tenderloins. They're like the leanest cut you can possibly buy. It like falls apart, melts in your mouth, but often needs just a little bit of fat added back into it.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. The next question. So when you have your cattle, you've got them on your property, they've been born on your property, you've raised them. Do they die on your property or do you take them somewhere? And both are good. I know farmers that do both, but I'm just curious, what's your process and what does their life cycle look like?
Yeah. So we say birth to butcher on our farm or rented land. They're born here. They're raised here, and then we put them on a trailer while they're still alive, and we drive them to the butcher. Our butcher is based out of Penhold, and when we got started with individual cuts, you had to have, and actually it's still that way, so be aware of that. If you're buying an individual cut from a consumer, it should be from a government certified, inspected facility. And so we searched out the ones that were closest to us, and we've been dealing with the one in Penhold for our entire business age. And so we've just really enjoyed them, and they've been really great to deal with. We also, because we're handling our cattle so much, they're not afraid, they're not stressed out. We try to take them up the night before so that they have a little bit of time to just chill out before they die, really. And that we do know that some cows will get stressed out and that can impact the flavor of the beef. And so there are people that do slaughter right on their property and then the butcher takes it from there. Whereas we've decided just for what works for our farm, right? Our cattle aren't stressed out going on the trailer. It's not that far. And then, we're able to do it the night before, which that's something that we've been able to work with them over, our butcher. And so that's what works for us, and we haven't seen it impact our beef.
Okay, I love that. Yeah. And so I love the piece too, how you're working with your cattle. They love you, they know you. You're the not shepherd because they're not sheep, but you are the cattle taker carer of. Is there a word for that? Cattleman, cattle handler. I don't know. Anyways, so that's beautiful. So let's ask about farmers market. So do you direct market 100% of your beef? Do you sell some back through the auction market? What does your marketing structure look like?
Because we don't sell the beef at a rate that would keep our farm profitable, we have a butcher program where we take cattle that, for whatever reason, we don't want to keep them to breed, or they're just not maybe necessarily a good mom or whatever, right? Where we don't need them to reproduce. And those likely will go into our butcher program. And then we do have a commercial cattle operation where we will take them into the auction and sell cows to the auction. So with that, we focus a lot on quarters and halves, mostly because it is easy. It's less time consuming than the individual cuts. We can take in orders throughout the year, take in deposits throughout the year, and then when it's ready to go, we book the date, we take up as many cattle as we need. And we just drive down the highway. So we start in Penhold, we meet in all the little towns along the way, and we say, hey, we're going to be here at this time. If you can't be there, we'll arrange something else. Let me know. And then we drop it off and take payment as we go. And so it's a couple busy nights in the fall we've learned a lot because we've been doing that the longest. The first time we ever did it, I was very pregnant with my fourth child. We were delivering way out by Strathmore because I hadn't figured out yet that we should only do down the highway. And I was having contractions and I didn't want to tell Eric because I thought this is not the night that I can go into labor with this kid. And anyway, we made it home. I didn't go into labor, and I didn't go into labor until the next week, where we had second deliveries to do. And the butcher called us about an hour after he was born. So Eric went home that night, picked up all the girls, went to the butcher, picked up all the meat, picked me up from the hospital, and then we drove around with our brand new baby and dropped off beef. So that was our first experience with quarters and halves. And now we've been doing, yes. So
okay, you go. And then I got something.
He's going to be 6 this year. And so this will be the 6th year that we've done quarters and halves. So we've learned a whole lot, and we no longer do it that way, but it is still the root, or like the foundation of our business is quarters and halves. And then, with individual cuts, we're doing it mostly through the old Uptown Market, which you know all about. And then, and then we do some deliveries into the cities, but we do find that that's very time consuming, and we've just had to continue to increase our delivery fees with the cost of fuel. And so it's not our most lucrative avenue of our business, and it's still available and it's still something we do, but not as often. And then farmers markets, we took a big step back from them when I went back to work full time. It still holds a place in my heart where I'd like to make more time for it. And we are reviewing what that looks like for our business in 2025, but no decisions have been made with that one yet.
Yeah. Okay, I just have to go back to driving down the road, delivering beef with contractions. Like that, honestly, when you said that, I got goosebumps all up and down my arm. And if there is one message that we can get to people from this whole podcast series, is that this is what farming means, is that even having babies is put on the back burner for the farm. I know when I was having babies, I was at a farmer's market 3 weeks after a C-section. I did payroll in the hospital. You know, like you just do what you got to do as a farm mama. You know, your kids almost take a second, everything almost takes a second seat to the farm. That's what people don't understand, is how important the farm is. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, the fact that you went to do meat deliveries and, you know, an hour after getting out of the hospital. When I was having my baby too, I had some C-sections. And when we were planning those C-sections, we said to the doctor, do not plan it on a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, because my husband at that point, but ex-husband now, will not be there because we've got things to do on the farm and it's just not happening. The farm came first. The farm comes first. And yeah, if there's one thing I can stress to people, is in farming, in agriculture, the farm is more important than anything else. And even having babies and even being in labor. So, wow. Thank you for being a farm mama, and thank you for, you know, doing what you got to do to feed us. So important. Yeah. Like honestly, goosebumps right up and down my arms. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I will add to that too, is that was part of the reason that as a kid, I said I didn't want any part of farming, right? Like it is all consuming and it always comes first. And I think that it's important to note that our kids know that, and it is a struggle. It is something that we want them to know how very important they are to us. But on Christmas Day, the cows get fed first. Sorry, kiddos. And this is going to make me teary, but I went back and I was looking at Facebook memories, and there was a night where we were supposed to be at a market. It was a Christmas market in the night, and we had samples ready to go, and Eric was going to be there or be with the kids, and I was going to leave. And I got a phone call. Sorry, the vet has an emergency. We're waiting. We need to meet with him. I'm not going to make it home. So, okay, kids, get back. We're going to town. And so they came to the market with me, and I was blown away by how, well, one, consumers were so appreciative of having them there, which I was surprised by. And then two, like, some people asked my oldest daughter a few questions and she could rattle off the answers better than I could. And I was like, well, one, they're watching. And two, like, they knew when mom was working. They knew when to do at markets. They know where to go to get the best snacks and what table to sit at so that we can see them from our freezer. And they are so involved. They've got their chickens. They've got where they're wanting to get sheep. My daughter's put a bunch of money aside so that she can get sheep and she can get on. She said, I'm going into business with dad. And so it is all consuming, but it's also such a huge blessing that we get to do this. And it's just such a huge part that our kids get to be involved with it. And I know that your kids are too. And they're probably running markets and doing all the things and talking greenhouses the same way that you are, right? So it's a huge blessing.
Hearing you talk about your babies at markets doing it, I just know what my babies did. My babies they're right now 13, 15, 17, and my girls were able to be at farmers markets with me. Being off the farm this year, someone said, oh, you get to spend more time, because I was working like, honestly, 80 hours a week in the summertime. And someone said to me this year, being off farm, and I had a job, a regular job, they said, oh, you get to spend more time with your kids now. And I said, no. I said, I actually was able to spend more time with my kids when I was working 80 hours a week doing farmers markets because my kids came with me. We did it as a family. We worked together. My then 12-year-old and 11-year-old and 10-year-old and 9-year-old, they were able to make some money because mom was working. Mom was, doing the farm. And I miss it. And so, I'm so happy that your kids have that opportunity. And that is why farming and small family farms is so important. I can't get that across enough. We need to protect our family farms and we need to protect the generational family farms. And unfortunately, I had to sell mine, and my 13-year-old always said, I'm going to take over the farm one day, Mom. And at this moment, it doesn't look like a reality. And so just being honest and transparent. And that's why I'm doing this podcast. That's why I'm doing Dawn's Dirt. That's why I'm talking about all of it, is because we need to get this story out. We need people to know that the family farm and doing it together as a group is so important. So thank you for doing it. Thanks for making me cry. Sorry. No, it's all good. Farm mamas talking to farm mamas, right? It's good. This conversation needs to happen. In your view, what role does regenerative farming play in food freedom and ensuring communities can access nutrient-dense food? Where do you see regenerative farming going in the future, I guess?
I think that for us, it's been a big step back from the industrial farm life, right? Like, we talked about how it's just us. Like, it's Eric and the kids and I, and his parents help where they can. It's a lot more hands-on, which I think is really important. We are really navigating the quality of health in our animals. We're really hands-on with the quality of our beef. And we can do that because, one, we keep it in a level of numbers that we can do that. But then that also makes it difficult with finances too, right? Like, it's difficult to keep up with the big guys. But I think that it does come back to, like, we can continue to industrially farm and we can continue to watch our soil be overused, and we'll just continue to watch the nutrients in our hay, the nutrients in our grass, and the nutrients in our wheat and crop deteriorate. And I think that just like in every aspect of farming, there's different methods that work best for every farm. But I think that if every farm were to take on just a little bit more of that regenerative mindset, and the mindset of, we need to get what we can out of this land while we can, but there's also generations coming up after us that need the soil to be in as best of health as it can be then as it is now, so that they can continue to use it too. I think that just everything will be more successful. I know that as Christians, Eric and I hold a deep responsibility to steward the land really well and to raise cattle that are healthy, knowing that it is a generational farm. It is something that we want our kids to take over and their kids to take over. But we have also, as we're the third generation on this farm, we've seen the negative impact of the overuse of the land and how it cannot support two families, two generations, let alone to bring a third and a fourth onto it and support them all. And so I think that if every farmer were to just take that one step of be like, well, maybe this year I'll use one less fertilizer, or maybe this year instead of breaking all my land, I'll put some cover crop on it, or just those little things like maybe I can integrate some livestock and instead of using a fertilizer, I'll use manure. Those little things I think could have a big impact on the industrialization of farming and keep it a little bit more high quality.
I love that. I was actually talking to a farmer in the past couple months here, and he kept saying, I'm borrowing my farm from my children. I'm borrowing my farm from my children. And I love that picture of if you as a parent are doing the best you can by your farm, hopefully there is a farm left for your children. And unfortunately, we have seen in agriculture, all sets of agriculture, and that's part of the reason I'm no longer farming, is I didn't get big. In agriculture, it seems like, and all facets of agriculture, you have to get bigger to survive because the margins are shrinking in every portion of agriculture. So if your margins are smaller and smaller and smaller, you have to get bigger and bigger and bigger to even make $1. Like if you're only making 10 cents profit off of the quarter section, you're going to need however many sections to make $1, right? And so that's kind of the model that's happening in agriculture right now. And that's why we're seeing the smaller family farms kind of go by the wayside, because they can't make it off that 10 cents. And that's exactly what happened to my farm too, is I was only 36,000 square feet of greenhouse. That was not big enough to even just sustain me as a single mama. And then I added the garden, and I made it a lot longer than I probably even should have, because I stopped with the grocery store, I stopped with the bureaucracy, I stopped with the warehouse, and I direct marketed. But even when farmers markets turned into bureaucracy, even then my farm got kind of pushed out. And so, yeah, we need to really focus on, as society, protecting these small farms. And that's why I'm such a proponent. That's why I wanted you on my show. I'm such a proponent of small family farms. You're doing it and you're working hard. You're both working off farm. Your children are sacrificing, but in a positive way too, really. It's not just all sacrifice. You're doing it for the greater good of not just your family, because there's positives with it, but society. And I love that. So we kind of touched on it, but let's touch on it just a little bit more as we close here. What advice would you give to farmers considering transitioning to regenerative grass-fed practices, or to consumers looking to support this type of farming? So you were saying one baby step, but if you could choose one step for a consumer or one step for, the neighbor on the other side of the fence, who you're not going to tell him how to farm because he's a lovely farmer too, but if you were to choose one little step, what would those be? What would that look like?
I think for cattle farming, we have seen a huge impact on the soil with the way that we move our cattle and being really intentional not to let them overgraze. So that would be my number one. Sorry, go ahead.
What happens when you overgraze? What does that look like?
Okay, you're going to get my nerdy coming out. Here we go. So when grass is growing above the soil, the roots are also growing underneath the soil. And so when a cow comes along and bites down on that grass, it actually triggers a reaction in the plant where it kind of protects itself. So it's like getting a haircut. When you get your hair cut, it can actually grow better because you're taking off all the overgrown parts, right? So that's what a cow does. And that triggers the growth of the roots. But when it bites it down so far that it's like on the same level as the soil, that kind of dries up the roots too. And so that one little initial bite indicates a chemical reaction in the soil. The roots start to grow down, it creates regrowth in the grass. If it cuts it down too much, there's not that ability for that plant to do that. And so it's struggling to create a deep root within within the soil, and you can't see underneath that. But if you are able to pull out a stalk of grass with a great root ball on it, you'll be able to see the nodules. You can see the life in it. There's bugs and there's worms and there's all of that that's like integrating that soil. It also helps with flood prevention and drought prevention, because the roots are helping that soil to absorb the water that comes when it rains, and then it holds on to it so that when there is drought, it's like a sponge, right? And so there's all these great benefits to making sure that your grass is growing well. And if it's not, then when like the dirty 30s come along and it's just dry, your grass grows and falls over because there's no root bed. And when the rain finally does come, it all washes away because there's nothing to soak it up. And sometimes it can come so hard that it just floods right into all of the houses and it floods instead of soaking in. So that is why I would say overgrazing is probably the number one thing where I'd say, like, if you're going to try to do something differently on a cattle farm with your animals, we use an electric fence system. All of our cattle are trained to it. They know that wire is going to shock them. And it's not a big thing. Cattle have tougher skin than we do, but it just gives them a little reminder that, like, hey, you can't go past that. And so then Eric sets it up in rows across the whole field. And so they stay in there. They all have access to water. Every time there's alleyways that will lead them to the water. And then he's able to just move them along. And they are always so excited when we come in to take this cattle down. And you can see the difference in the grass there too. So it's really exciting. So that's my number one. And I can't remember the rest.
Rotate. That's okay. Rotate your grass. So if you had one suggestion for the neighbor down the road who's doing cattle, just rotate the grass. Do you get more grass?
Yeah, you definitely can, because the soil is better. And so then it wants to produce more. When you put that seed in, it's more likely to do well because your soil.
So that answers the question. So that's one small tip for the farmer down the road who just maybe wants to do something just a little different. Just rotate your pastures. And then the next thing is back to consumers. So what is one small change that a consumer could make and that all of us could make? And I was thinking earlier when you were talking about hold and have, is it true that it's cheaper in the long run to buy a whole cow or a half a cow or a quarter of a cow than it is to buy your meat cut by cut? So,
yeah. So I'll start with your first question with the consumers. I think, like, we do live in a day and age where we see grocery prices are skyrocketing. Lots of houses have to have a dual income to survive, right? And so I understand when you walk through a farmer's market, sometimes there's a little bit of sticker shock there, and it's hard to support those farmers. But I think that's it. If you can make that one small change, like, oh, I want to buy beef, I will seek out a farmer that has what lines up with my values, and I will order a quarter or a half. The benefits of a quarter or a half or a whole are, I've done the math where if you were to buy an individual cut of the same amount of what you would get put in your freezer at one time with a quarter and a half, it's like a $300 to $500 savings throughout the year. And so I find too that it's convenient, right? May have to say that for that large lump sum purchase, but over the long term, it is cheaper. And we bring it to your closest town. You come pick it up from our trailer and then take it home, fill your freezer. And every single time you're like, oh, I forgot to defrost some grilled beef for supper tonight. You just grab it, throw it in a sink of water, and it'll defrost real quick. And then you've got supper, right? Whereas if you're like, oh, I didn't defrost and I run to the grocery store, and then I'm going to pick up chips and treats while I'm there too, and I'm actually spending more money. just let us stock your freezer.
I'm going to actually bring that all back to my new business, Dawn's Dirt. So a package of feed only costs a couple of dollars, whereas what the produce that you get out of that package of seed is a lot. And again, I'm just going to throw quote unquote farmers markets. I love farmers markets because I love farmers, but a lot of times in quote unquote farmers markets. You're not necessarily getting farm from the farmer to the consumer produce. And so if you can grow your own vegetables, then you will save money, which in turn will allow you to spend a little bit more money on your beef, on your high quality meat from a direct from a market, direct from a farmer. And the savings you would get off of a buying a whole or a half or a quarter or something like that of beef will eventually, if you do that whole system, and then you're not going to the grocery store and wasting money on chips and pop and the unhealthy non-food, really. Not saying that you can't have that as a treat, but you'll save money in the long run. So it's a bigger picture. So learn how to grow your vegetables in the space you have. You'll save money, which then you can put into animals, which if you buy a whole or quarter, you'll save more money again, and it will make your food cost ultimately cheaper. Or am I out to lunch in that?
No, and that is a very good point. Yeah, I'm like, you're inspiring me. I didn't put my garden in last summer, but I'm like, okay, I better start planning for this summer.
Maybe you want to hire a garden coach to come and help you do your garden. Put a little plug in there with, I know the vegetable side, you know the beef side, so we'd make a great team. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming out today. Thank you for recording this with me. I'm pro farmer, whatever size farm you have. I love it. I love hearing about your farm. I love how important it is. I especially love the mama talk and the mama parts of it. So before we sign off here, can you please tell our viewers, where can they find you? How do we get beef from you?
Yeah, so our name is going through a bit of a change. We were EC Williams Livestock. Now we're Williams Cattle. So on Instagram and Facebook, you can find us at Williams Cattle AB. That's where we're at, our handles. And then for our website, it's coming. The new name is coming, but right now it's still www.ecwilliamslivestock.ca.
Okay. So just look up, Eric and Courtney Williams and their cows. I love it. And so I encourage you to, if you're from Alberta here, buy from this farm and support this young family, and it will put into their next generations of farm. So I love it. Thanks so much for being here, Courtney.